I'll start. Anyway, so some time ago, as Robin says, I wrote a book about coal and about how this dark substance from deep in the ground released from itself a rainbow of colours, inaugurating a synthetic world. The story I tell is a specifically German one. The coal-based chemical industries of colour synthesis developed from the middle of the 19th century. The story of Höchst AG, for example, is typical. The factory, which you see in that little image there, was founded in 1863 under the name Tar Colour Factory Meister Lucius & Co. for the production of aniline dyes. The first colouring material produced there was red magenta dye, or fuchsia. Characteristic of Hertz, as of all the German chemical industry, was its ability to devise substitute or ersatz materials to compensate for lacking natural resources. German chemistry was cooked up in the pans and glass tubes of hobby scientists with alchemical zeal. They sought substances such as synthetic red colours in red and blue, cheaply coaxed metallic matter and gemstones, or industrially produced soda ash and guano. Time's dominion was to be cracked through the accelerating power of chemical reaction. Artificial treasures were chased to supply burgeoning industries in a land without colonies and without its own expansive natural resources. Hertz's story is repeated in part at Badische Aniline- und Soda-Fabrik, or BASF, founded in 1865 to produce coal tar dyes, its first products were aniline dyes, whose success was enmeshed with that of the textile industry. Synthetic pigments followed each other rapidly, of which indigo was probably the most important. Later, in the years of World War, German industrial chemistry, under the name IG Farben, came to play a devastating role on the world stage. My interest was to find out something about capitalism as a mode of extraction, an extraction of nature's subterranean treasures, to put it somewhat romantically, and then a second extraction, as science and technology extracts from that darkness a panoply of colours. There was, in a sense, a parallel proposed between that nature down there that is subject of extraction, which is then converted into riches, and that factory proletariat down or over there, who comes to process the chemicals and from whom labour power is extracted, and from it, in turn, then another conversion into profit. Coal into colour, an emblem of the processes of capitalism with its peculiar mode of turning something into another thing, or even something into its opposite, turning something darkly inaccessible into something dazzling, captivating, and attractive, turning human activity into private property, turning the universal metals of nature and other treasures into the particular metals of money, and then later paper or liquid crystal registrations on a screen, or turning fantastical, romantic philosophy of nature into nightmarish rational science. There's a vignette in Walter Benjamin's 1930s memoir, A Berlin Childhood, called At the Corner of Steglitzer and Gentiner. Benjamin conjures up a visit to an aunt. In a preparatory note for this vignette, Benjamin jots down the line, "The mine works of Falun," on the dining room table. How out of fear I bent myself further and further over the table. Falun was the site of a mine in Sweden, well known for its copper extracted from iron pyrites, and for its gold, silver, lead, sulphur, and green vitriol, interred in its many kilometres of talc and mica-lined tunnels, galleries, and shafts. The mineworks at Falun were notorious for fateful cave-ins, which took on fantastical forms in literature and music too. In the times between implosion and explosion, wealth was amassed at Fallon, as elsewhere, through hard graft. In the darkest tunnels lay the brightest gemstones and metals. Benjamin observes of the model mine works in his memoir. For no sooner had I entered than she took care to see that the big glass cube was set in before me. A cube enclosing a whole living mining operation with little miners, face workers and pit foremen with carts, hammers, lanterns moving with the precision of clockwork. This toy, if one may call it that, dated from a time when even the child of a wealthy bourgeois family was permitted a view of workplaces and machines. And of all of them, the mine had always been singled out, because it could point not only to the treasures that hard labour had wrung from it for the benefit of all industrious workers, but also to the silver gleam in its veins to which the Biedermeier period, along with Jean-Paul, Novalis, Tieck and Werner, had lost its heart. Benjamin evokes here the double-sidedness of the mine, industry and fantasy. Industry. The mine is a place of labour, wealth, production. Benjamin points out the ideology of this toy mine works. It presents the virtue of hard labour, carried out by another class than the one who hosts its replica in its fine drawing rooms. As coal mine, it is the basis of all other production. Coal transforms into energy for further production, but it also forms the basis of chemically derived substitute products. And the metals mine, or mineral mine, is a place where concentrated natural deposits could be wrung from an earth that gave up its riches only reluctantly and sometimes took life in return. Gold and silver and gems can be collected virtually in their natural state and their beauty brought up to the upper world where they're transformed into concentrated value. Through labour, wealth is amassed and nature is transformed. My images are sometimes slightly obliquely relating. This is a new Disney theme park attraction that is in the making. Many of the hippest intellectuals of 19th century, late 18th and early 19th century Germany studied mining and geology, Germany's fashionable new sciences of the time. And Goethe, who administered the reopening of the silver mines at Ilmenau, keen not to be simply a bureaucrat, familiarized himself with the technological aspects of mining. Friedrich von Hardenberg was a student at the Berg Academy, the mining academy in Freiberg, in 1800, and completed a geological inventory on bituminous Holzerdenlager, bituminous carboniferous layers in central Germany. He worked as an inspector of salt mines and mines till his early death in 1801, and his reports on the different extraction methods and processes of brown coal, which until then had been used only by chance as a fire material, nudged the Industrial Revolution into being, though coal took a while to be established as a major energy source in Germany. Factory owners were not keen, in the absence of good channels of distribution, and peasants and agricultural workers were keener to take their fuel illegally and for free from fallen branches in the forest, as Marx's first political journalistic writings would note in its examination of the implications around the fact that the theft of wood was the most frequent crime in 19th century Saxony. By night, under the pen name Novalis, this same von Hardenberg writes more on the mines, but this time romantically. He writes of wise miners who possess a peculiar happiness that eludes the mechanisms of exchange, his relationship to matter being aesthetic and sensual. It's enough for him that he knows where the sparkly and glittery deposits lurk and that he's able to draw them into the light. Novalis picks out metals and minerals as inherently communal, and if their nature is abused, they turn against the abuser, dragging their opponent down by nature's revenge. Coal was the key substance for making machinery turn its wheels and fire its pots and produce its gases. Made at the back of time and in the belly of the earth, this compact substance was hauled up to produce rapid change on the Earth's surface. Philosophers speculated on the origins of the earth and all its contents. Natural philosophers turned natural historians probed and gazed and poked and fondled matter. Alchemists turned chemists, and the world was not only to be known in all its parts, it too would come to be remade in theory and recast in laboratories. In the 1830s, the most spectacular transformation occurred. Coal gave up the entire spectrum of colour, releasing the deposits of the past that had been locked into its compact darkness. Colour glittered forth from blackness. It was a kind of magic. Coal reintroduced wonderment into chemistry. What it conjured forth was miscellany from non-appearance. Coal's apparent magic was in its ability to transform into its opposite. Coal is the sedimentation of everything, a concentration that might come poetically to seem like the very night of the world that replaces all that has disappeared, warmth and light and colour. And yet its antitheses are contained within it. It gives all those things back again. As a book published by I.G. Farben on the history of organic chemistry, the chemistry of carbon and its compounds, expressed it in 1938. The shiny black of coal deposits had locked inside of them a previous world of life and all its colours. That composite deadness, black but multicoloured, dead but once teeming with original life, could again release from itself life, for as Goethe put it in Faust, life exists in colourful reflections. The transformation must seem alchemical, like rubbish into gold. Decomposed matter becomes coal, and then, in addition, that waste, coal tar, becomes colour. Dark coal becomes the very stuff of organic chemistry as well as industry. It brings waste back into circulation. Nothing is foreign to the system. Rather, it's all a matter of how it recirculates. This was the future work of chemistry, the rising industrial science, to reproduce the world synthetically and from the cheapest stuffs. The chemist Friedrich Ferdinand Runge made the first step into this region, isolating aniline from coal tar. From the tarry waste of Novalis' coal, Runge painted a synthetic rainbow. This is one of Runge's dropper experiments from another connected part of his chemical life. The mine is a place of dreaming. In the mine, the Romantics found a subterranean realm in which beauty and transformation ruled, just at the same time as a burgeoning science meshed with industrial needs, and energy was expended on novel chemical wonders fabricated in new factories that sprang up alongside the rivers and in the forests, marking anew the German landscape. Just then, the Romantics were dreaming of another world of easy natural abundance, riches, gemstones, diamonds, coal and silver, gold and silver, trapped under the crust of Germany's earth or buried in the mountains. I wanted to see how the chemical and geological investigations of banal material, coal, as well as other minerals and chemicals, gave rise to a poetics framed against the backdrop of a mining industry, and in relation to traces of alchemical thought and romantic natural history. German Romantics, in their stories and fairy tales, recognised that beneath the crust of the earth was a realm of untold riches. How typical of Romantic thought is the scenario of miners spying the secret centre of the earth, generous and bountiful, endlessly beautiful, and a guarding spirit whom they betray, casually revealing the treasures or misusing them for personal gain. It's as familiar from the folk tales of the Brothers Grimm as from the artistic fairy tales of Tieck and others. In both, industry opens up to fulfillment only to slam shut again, leaving just desire and recollection. The mind's precious contents mirror the mind's precious contents, desires and memories that fuel life, but may evaporate when exposed to the cold air of reason. Raised to the surface, the mind's contents are forced into social time and social histories. Still down below, time goes awry, or, as folklore thought, was immobilised. The multiply told tale of the petrified body of a miner at Falun was emblematic of these. In 1719, in the copper mines there, at a depth of 130 metres, the perfectly preserved body of a young man was found. In 1670, this young miner had died in the mine, his body found between two shafts, had lain steeped in green vitriol for half a century. The body was soft at first, but when brought to the surface turned hard as stone, its features fixed as at the moment of death. The corpse was placed, Snow White-like, under glass to protect it from the elements, but the efforts failed. It crumbled into dust, but not before a grey-haired old lady passing on crutches happened to recognise the still youthful features of her fiancé. One dead man is raised from the grave with the face of a youth. One decrepit old body is seized by youthful love. In the cave, the past juts into the present. The ancient actions of water, heat, animal and plant decomposition forms rock and coal and gemstones. In the mine, too, the kingdoms of separation go awry. The romantically inclined geologists believed the mineral world paralleled our own world. The contents of the earth were born of a tumultuous earth copulation, and since that time, at a slower pace than us, it too, like us, was striving to refine itself. Minerals and metal reflect us as they strive to inhabit the higher world, just as we strive to be closer to God. The forces of anorganic nature repeat themselves at a higher strength in organic nature. Gotthilf Heinrich Schubert's influential study, Views from the Dark Side of Natural Science from 1808, reported on a realm of nature that was not visible simply from or to our perspective, but which is close to us, and in some ways a memory of our own past as we emerge from mud. The transition from the kingdom of minerals to that of plants and animals passes through metal, writes Schubert. That is, we emerge of metal. And there he sought to the point of continuity from anorganic life to organic life. Later, scientists will discover carbon, the organic element, as the link, relating us rather to diamond, graphite and coal. In grasping this beautiful and manifold world of coal, of minerals, investigators were directed by a romantic philosophy of nature with its sense of animism of the object world of nature and its notion of dynamic and polar forces at play. The poles meet. Polar thinking can be dialectical. In exposing to the light of day and dream of night this new underground layer, they inaugurated a logic of extraction that would also commute human labour power into another extractable substrate. And I suppose I wanted to conclude, if I can conclude, I mean, I've tried to outline something like a dialectic of Romanticism, how the mind is open to industry and progress, development, simultaneously as it's open to fantasy. And it provides, through both, materials for extraction, the sort of industrial extraction, but also the fantastical extraction of myth, I suppose, in a sense. And also the extraction of surplus value from human labour power. And I think that all of this is sort of implicated in this idea of the resource curse, this sort of concentrated sort of oppositional polar forces there. I'm struck lately by some forceful returns of extraction and want to finish by noting a couple of things which I haven't worked through. But I've been struck since thinking about this, about hearing about this age of Neo-extractivism that we exist within, a renewed pillaging of the Earth's crust for the minerals that are so desired, in particular for smartphones, computers, and so on. I'm intrigued by that phrase, extractivism, neo-extractivism, which at first I thought was a form of activism, and then sort of understood it, but then simultaneously also understood that, for example, in Latin America it has produced an immense activism against the actions of exploding mountains and a very large-scale and swift accumulation of resources. And that sort of image, this neo-extractivism, produces an image of a kind of intense surface devastation. I mean, this is actually an image from China, mining rare earth metals. An image of a kind of dark devastation in order to produce, and I meant to put in here an image of a sort of computer screen, this intense scintillation of bright liquid crystal colorations that we're surrounded by, we carry in our pockets. Now, another version, I suppose, of from tarry coal to a rainbow of colour, from these dark earth minerals to this rainbow of colourful luminescence. I also wonder, and this is something I know very little about, and I wonder if Ian knows more about this, I wonder about other extractions in the realm of the new high-tech knowledge economy, and have been alerted to the phenomenon of seasteading, which these offshore, they're compared to oil rigs. I mean, very consciously talked about as oil rigs of ideas in a sense. So they're offshore located floating structures which now allow people to be amassed together there while avoiding the legalities of visas and visa restrictions, and you bring people there and they're generating ideas and invention, which we talked about, and thinking about these things outside the nation state and its legality. And so I was thinking about this sort of seasteading phenomenon as a type of ideas or mental extraction that possibly bypasses matter, or at least minds nothing more than what we like to call grey matter, and wondering about the kind of social bonds, as this was talked about, by this sort of form of a sort of new oil rigging, this sort of new notion of a kind of intellectual abstraction. But I'll leave it at that. Thank you.